Good afternoon, everybody. So my name's Toby Emden. Today we're going to be discussing a zero trust approach to modern authentication, and specifically some of the things companies need to be thinking about as they plan the migration from legacy authentication architectures such as ADFS to a more robust model that incorporates the principles and best practices of zero trust. So as I said, my name is Toby Emden. I'm a managing director at Agile, and I've been in this space for about 20 years. And I've experienced this evolution of enterprise security, I should say, not just as a consultant to various organizations, but also as a cybersecurity leader within industry. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues, Harish Atharaju from Microsoft and Randy Weimer, who is one of our most accomplished Microsoft security architects at Agile. I'll let Harish and Randy briefly introduce themselves. Harish.
Thank you. My name is Harish. I'm a principal program manager at Microsoft with the Identity CXP engineering team. And it's a pleasure working and addressing this with you along with my good friends here at Agile. Randy?
Thank you. I'm Randy Weimer, and Toby's been at this for 20 years, but I'm getting close to 40 years now. So I can one-up him there.
Thanks, Randy. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so today we've got a packed agenda, and I hope you find this both informative and maybe a little bit entertaining. So we'll be starting with an overview of some of the most common authentication models used in the modern enterprise. Then moving on to some best practices that Microsoft has developed to help customers adapt to the evolving demands of today's threat landscape. And finally, we'll be discussing some blind spots that we commonly encounter in the enterprise, and that includes a discussion of some configuration standards and best practices. And then we'll wrap with an overview of a three-step approach for adopting a modern authentication posture. So let's begin with a brief recap of, some of the most common planning considerations for cloud migration, which is one of today's major drivers for adopting a new approach to authentication. So according to a 2020 report by Flexarea, 66% of businesses list cloud migration as one of their top challenges with cloud adoption. And these are some of the major drivers that we see: migrating of workloads, understanding application dependencies, assessing the technical feasibility of migration, making sure your resources are right-sized, and of course, migrating applications and data. Moving on. So, let's start by looking at some of the typical drivers that are forcing customers to look at cloud identity today. The most common ones we see: cash flow challenges. So as organizations look to optimize their IT spend, they're seeking opportunities to consolidate and streamline infrastructure to free up dollars for other major initiatives by reducing technical debt. Cybersecurity threats, which is kind of an obvious one. We live in a time where the threat landscape is evolving at a terrifying rate, and that's forcing companies to take a closer look at their risk profile, especially as regulatory mandates become more onerous. So that in turn often leads to businesses adopting more sophisticated approaches to harden their cybersecurity posture. One increasing trend that we're seeing in the industry is the adoption of a zero trust approach to cybersecurity, which, as we all know, isn't as much of a technology as it is a mindset and philosophy that involves major transformation. Another driver we see is the ability to meet surge demand. So, for example, there are a number of industries right now, such as healthcare and retail, that are seeing a spike in customer demand. So what they're finding is that in many cases, their existing systems and solutions just can't keep up anymore. And that is driving modernization or even replacement of legacy systems. Business continuity, which is always a constant in our industry. Continuous availability is always a critical business imperative for most organizations. And when you think about it, the potential losses to a business arising from even a short-term outage are driving constant reevaluation of business continuity processes. So that drives increased spend on hardening and, in a lot of cases, modernization of business systems. And then finally, many companies that we're speaking to are viewing data center contract expiry as an opportunity to accelerate migration to the cloud. So for all of these reasons, IT and security teams are beginning to take a hard look at their existing environments, including legacy directory infrastructures, IDPs, and also legacy authentication models such as ADFS. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to my good friend Harish. Harish, do you want to talk about some of the supporting architecture and you know, what you're seeing out there today?
Absolutely, Toby. Thank you. So I wanted to extend on top of what Toby said. Many times the current app infrastructure may look something like this. ADFS or other on-premise infrastructure coupled with cloud, coupled with apps, a complicated multi-solution infrastructure. This is what it really means in terms of infrastructure. As a foundation, we have Active Directory, then a Federation service, WAP, SQL, and all the bells and whistles that make up the infrastructure. So at the minimum, you're already seeing in the center, we have 4 machines. Further, if you're not happy, let's add in additional complexity like the Microsoft 365 and other SaaS applications into the picture. Then you must manage Microsoft services and other services in the cloud. So not only you end up with multiple places to manage applications, but also a significant amount of infrastructure to support just single sign-on. This complication can grow even further if you're managing other identity and access management solutions like on-premises, solutions that are on-premises, provisioning, governance, access control. This complexity doesn't end here, but I also want to show you something else. Next, let's change the lens from the infrastructure complexity to return of investment with the total economic value. What you would actually look at, and this comes from what we did earlier this year, where we commissioned a study with Forrester to help qualify the economic benefits of securing all apps with a single identity solution. From the insights, we inferred customers who secure all these apps with Azure AD can achieve an ROI of 123%. Not only does Azure AD reduce the management and oversight needed for your IAM team, it can further help in 3 ways. 1, reducing costs by retiring old on-premise infrastructure. 2, significantly reducing the likelihood of data breaches, and further help to reduce help desk costs associated to password resets, which many organizations are still doing it to date. And all of this with the key aspect of improving employee productivity. This has topped by 100% cost savings by eliminating on-prem infrastructure. Next, I really want to focus on how we address all these apps with Azure AD. When you have applications connected to Azure AD, you start to enforce strong policies across these apps. Apps can be categorized into 2 buckets. First is the SaaS app and cloud-hosted apps. The SaaS apps are either cloud-hosted applications or server-hosted applications, and these today support some form of federation or token-based authentication. These SaaS apps like ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday, OneDrive, etc., can be utilized straight out of the app gallery, making your app journey really, really fast and super secure. The second category are the LOB applications that are normally hosted on the server. These on-prem applications can be in the form of OIDC, header-based, LDAP, SAML 1.1. They are password-based, integrated Windows authentication, header-based, or disabled methods of single sign-on. Keeping these 2 categories in picture, we built an integrated adaptive access policy engine, for example, like conditional access, where you can minimize user friction while ensuring strong security. Later in Randy's section, he will go much deeper in and provide you the depth on the whole conditional access, and he'll build it out for you. But for now, let's move on to the next point. It's a good time to address legacy authentications in the next slide. Now, in Azure AD, we have 2 solutions that will really help to address legacy authentication apps. The first is App Proxy. This is our native solution that enables remote access to on-premise web apps without the need of a VPN. App Proxy today supports protocols such as Kerberos, remote desktop protocol, header-based auth, SAML. In fact, just last week, we announced the public preview of header-based app support for App Proxy. The second option is to use our secure hybrid partners. If your apps support other protocols, or if you need corporate network access, if you're using network components or app delivery controllers like F5, Zscaler, then Azure AD can connect those to enable these types of controls, to help in those controls and legacy authentication apps. We have several organizations that you would see there on the slide, and we added a few of them even to recently to enhance your customer posture. So why not leverage your existing investments to accelerate your zero trust journey? I would like our customers to leverage the full value of Azure AD, as you will see next here as this has come up. A survey we ran earlier this year found some customers may have an average of 9 identity solutions, a separate MFA solution, a separate SSO solution, a separate adaptive access solution, etc., etc. As you can imagine, having all these disparate solutions from different vendors is not only complicated to manage, but also increases cost quickly. Your organization, could be an enterprise or SMB, may be using products that can do with one or more that's already built into Azure AD in terms of capabilities. If you're already invested in Azure AD, it makes sense to take advantage of the breadth of capabilities built into Azure AD rather than pay for redundant use, as we showed you earlier with ADFS. From value, let's shift gears and model out the zero trust approach in the next section. Zero trust access architecture addresses modern security challenges that come and with cloud migration and the mobile workflow. So you see these three are going to be totally connected and integrated. By implementing zero trust, Microsoft takes a layered approach to securing corporate and customer data. Microsoft phased implementation of zero trust centers around user identity, device health verification, validation of application health, and secure least privileged access to corporate resources and services. With that, I actually wanted to get into the next section of zero trust. Randy, from your experience, how do these scenarios open up for zero trust? Your thoughts from your experience.
So the elements on the left are the inputs into the policy engine. Things like who is the user? What groups are they in? Things on the right represent the applications or the resources those users are trying to access. So we've got these signals coming into the security policy engine that get to make decisions about should this user at this time be awarded access. That's the decision at the bottom. So the signals, the decision constructed by the policies that your organization defines. So if we drill into this central part, the security policy engine, this next slide represents it, a little bit more detail. So in Azure, on a daily basis, there are on the order of 170 terabytes of information coming into the machine learning engine to inform the risk analysis that the conditional access system applies when it makes these access control decisions. So much of this is in the nature of a real-time decision. At the moment in time that user is trying to gain access to a resource, do we allow it, do we refuse it, or do we do some mitigating step like enforce an MFA requirement? Or in certain scenarios, we can enforce a requirement that a user be made to change their password. So again, inputs coming into this engine make the decisions based on things like the user, the resource they're accessing, the device health they're on, what IP, what network, what country are they coming from. And my choices are things like allow or block, or issue a token that has a different set of claims so that the application can enforce even different requirements on that user. allow them to read, for example, but don't allow them to write data, or require strong authentication, and if they don't already have strong authentication, let's force it. Force a password reset. So how does this magic happen? Okay, the answer is rooted in the open standards. This model that we use today of claims-based access, and that's based on several open standards. OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, OpenID Connect is in fact built on top of OAuth 2 and SAML. So it's the virtue of these protocols are what allow us to consolidate access control in one place. You know, so why should we consolidate that access control? In a legacy world, access control decisions are almost universally enforced within an application, application by application. And for us to gain visibility as to not just who has access to what, but who is actually accessing what. To answer questions like that, who is actually accessing data, we go to great trouble to aggregate log data, to pull it into SIEM systems, and it allows us to do detective controls, but not preventative controls. We're able to aggregate this data long after the access has been awarded and used. But with these open standards and with the conditional access system, if we route this access decision through a central place where we're able to aggregate all these signals and all this data, we're able to, at runtime, make informed decisions about allowing or rejecting that access. It also gives us great forensic after the fact visibility because all this data is logged in one place. So my case to you is, why should we consolidate access control? Is because it's now possible because of these open standards protocols. And I would advocate that any legacy apps, it's to your interest to refactor them, not necessarily change their code, but at least park them behind the proxy so that it is in the path before users are awarded that access. So the last slide, I asked the rhetorical question, why consolidate access? Here it's why consolidate access using Azure. And the magic, the secret sauce is this conditional access engine, the 170 terabytes of risk signaling data that comes into the engine, that a machine learning process is able to do things that standard algorithms that are applied in application code can never hope to achieve. Okay, the screenshot on the right of this slide shows the management interface for defining a conditional access policy, where I can apply a policy to a set of users or to a set of groups, or I can turn it around and I can say this policy excludes these people or excludes these groups. I've got this second element in the middle column, the sign-in risk. That's a calculated score from a service in Azure called the Identity Protection. And it involves both real-time signaling, things that can be done at the moment in milliseconds, as well as offline analysis, things that aren't available in that moment when we've got to make that decision, but can be learned by doing log analysis, like the impossible travel scenario, where a user, 5 minutes ago logged in from Moscow and now they're logging in from Beijing. That's just shouldn't be happening. Okay, so the identity protection system brings a risk score into the calculation, and then your policy can decide, do I allow or deny? I can do it based on IP locations. I can ban whole countries or whole lists of countries. I can target specific apps or all apps in a classification. That central column bottom, the device state is now in preview. It's not just, is this device registered or domain joined, but I now have the ability with Intune and Microsoft Endpoint Management to actually know the state of the device. Is it compliant? Does it have the right software and protections configured on that device at this moment? Okay, so all of this goodness is available in Azure. You're not going to find this richness or capability in your ADFS server. Okay, and finally, the last on the lower left of this slide, there's efforts underway in an OpenID working group, an emerging standard called the Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol. If you're familiar with SAML and OAuth, you would understand that these tokens that are what allow a user to access a resource, they have a duration. So it's not like we're evaluating that access on every round trip. Okay, we're going to issue a token. It has a finite lifetime before we get another chance to do this analysis and evaluation. The ambition of the Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol is to allow an application to contribute information into the token issuance process, so that if an application becomes aware during the lifetime of that token that circumstances have changed, the application can on its own refuse access to that user. Let's say, for example, their IP address changed. You know, they're presenting the same token, but their IP address has changed. The app could deny them access, but with the Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol, that app can convey that changed circumstance back to the IDP, so that the IDP will in the future treat this user differently. And if you're not aware, Microsoft has already implemented the Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol concepts in the Office 365 services. And they've committed to update those implementations once the standard has been ratified and finalized. So, you know, you should consolidate access control. You should consolidate it in Azure. So how do you do that? How do you retire your current ADFS and move this workload to Azure? If your ADFS is simply being used to federate into Azure for the purpose of Office 365, then this is an easy change. It is extraordinarily easy. If your ADFS has not only Office 365, but other relying parties configured, both SAML, WS Federation, then all of that workload can be migrated to Azure, but it will take some planning and effort because you'll have to touch each of those relying parties. If your ADFS deployment is using the old school Azure MFA server, what was at one time Phone Factor, then your users will need to re-register in the Azure MFA service. So you have to plan and undertake a campaign to get them to re-register. If you're not using ADFS, if you're using third-party MFA solutions, I would encourage you to consolidate that access control in Azure and use this conditional access service. Okay, what decisions do you make before you can move this workload? You've got to decide, are we going to use the password hash sync model, meaning take my on-prem AD passwords and via a secure hash of the hash, make that password testable in Azure. Azure will never get that password in storage. They will get it at runtime from the user, but they will test it against the hash of a hash of the on-prem password. So that's probably the easiest, best option from my point of view, although there are certain things that you do forfeit with that. Okay, so there are some details that have to be worked through. The alternative to password hash sync is something called pass-through authentication, which is Azure puts up a screen, captures the username and password, but instead of testing that password against Azure, it makes a call through the Azure AD Connect back to your on-prem Active Directory. So the ultimate password store remains in your on-prem AD. This diagram, illustrates these choices on the left: password hash sync and cloud accounts, okay, or pass-through authentication. And that blue bar is a kind of a measure of the resiliency of that solution. The shorter that blue bar, the more isolated, the fewer moving parts you're dealing with. Okay, so a push notification is the second factor. It involves the user and their credential, but it also involves the Azure MFA service, has to be live and running. The device has to be able to receive a signal from some Wi-Fi or phone carrier, and I need the mobile OS application on that device. So there's more critical parts that could fail, okay? All the way to the right is where all of you, I would hope, are aspiring to get to, which is truly a passwordless future, okay? So today we've got passwords. We need to add the MFA layer, but your long-term best interest in the enterprise is to go passwordless, and it's probably more ripe for adoption and enabling in your networks than you probably imagine today. So what, in effect, I'm talking about Windows Hello for Business. There's another use case where I can log in to my Windows machine purely using my Authenticator app, okay? But again, that's less resilient. There's more things that can go wrong that would cause an outage there. Or finally, over on the right, I can do a FIDO2 key. But effectively, a Windows Hello, the TPM in your Windows laptop is your FIDO2 key. So I need to move on and hand this back to my colleague.
Thanks, Randy, and thanks, Harish. So that was extremely informative. Hope everybody has found this helpful. We've talked about the business imperatives to enable cloud authentication through Zero Trust and some of the blind spots created by ADFS. We've heard about Microsoft's vision and got a line of sight into their architecture to enable Zero Trust, and then into the specifics of the protocols that deliver fine-grained modern authentication. And we've also taken a look into the not so distant future with continuous access evaluation, passwordless authentication. So the biggest challenge with these kinds of undertakings, as always, is how do you get started? So we can help you there. We've got a very quick 3-step process which enables us to assess and determine, what is the right approach for you. And even better, as a Microsoft partner, we have access to programs that will allow us to do this for you at zero cost, which is always a good thing. So if you're interested, then please reach out to us and let us know. You can email me, toby.emden@edgeowl.com, or you can connect with us through LinkedIn. The links are in the chats. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. And I wish you all a very happy and safe holidays. Thank you.